Welcome back to another edition of Talking Ball. We've got JD here, and this is going to be an episode more on college basketball in totality than specifically on Duke. And JD, we've got to talk about this NCAA settlement, something that has been in the works for a long time now. And it's the start of the start of it. I guess the start would have technically been NIL, but this seems like we're making things more official now, a little bit less wild and rampant, but at the same time, there's still a lot of work to do. And I am very curious. You've been reading about what's been going on here. What are your initial takeaways with this NCAA settlement?
That we're back to the Wild West. That everything that we tried to do in terms of bringing the backroom deals to get players are superficially taken care of, but may have inadvertently made it worse. So the lawsuit we're talking about is House versus the NCAA. And they were actually combined 3 lawsuits against the NCAA over NIL money. And that's what the lawsuits were about. So the way to break this down is going backwards and going forwards. And in terms of going backwards, I think they made a lot of progress because there were a number of players that joined. What 390,000 players joined the class action. And they joined the class action really for the period from 2016 to 2020. The beginning of NIL is 2021.
Yes, that was
Right.
it was Coach K's last year, Palo's year.
Right. So it's a 5-year window that really it is the NCAA football and basketball players that were furious that they could go back to their, dorm room, play a basketball game and see themselves on the game. And they go, why are we getting paid for our likeness? That's the NIL, so the likeness. So that is one of the things that brought it about.
Yeah, and I think it was just last year they brought back the NCAA football game, which basketball's not back yet, but both football and basketball hadn't been able to play. But I think what you're getting at, not necessarily the video games, but just the overall, they're on TV, right? March Madness, these big bowl games for football. And the athletic directors, the school presidents, the schools themselves are making all this money. And the athletes, it was the infamous, going back to Shabazz Napier. Was it Shabazz Napier? There's a UConn guard. In my head, it was Napier talking about how, I think it was like in 2014, somewhere in that range, that they didn't have enough money to eat, and
yeah, so he stole computers or something.
I think that was Boatwright, if I remember. I don't want to put Napier's name, into the mud. I think that was Boatwright, but yeah. So going from that to where we are now, where Cooper Flagg, they announced, he made a lot more than a few $1 million in college basketball. So yeah, we've come a long way, but to your point, JD, it has opened. It's certainly not a perfect system by any means, and it does open the door for more questions than answers, I would say.
So let's go back to going backwards, where I think the lawsuits did the most amount of good. Basically, it's the Power 5 conferences and the NCAA that had to put up $2.8 billion to take care of the claims of the athletes before 2021. And that, I think that's a good thing that uh, these athletes were treated fairly. And I think they'll figure out how to. I don't know how they figure out how Jack gets $10,000, but JD only gets 8,000. But all right, we've got a framework here. Now, going forward, this is where it really gets interesting because what they're trying, again, I think at best they have a framework here. And by the way, to our listeners, because the 5 power conferences were really the recipients of the lawsuits, approximately 25 states where these schools exist are going to buy into the settlement. There is still now no clarity as to whether the other 25 states are going to buy in yet. And we're going to leave that up to Charlie Baker and the NCAA to decide how he's going to enforce it. But there's an enforcement committee. They recently hired Brian Seeley from the MLB, Major League Baseball, because going forward, the concept is to create a tax cap.
Mm-hmm.
And
Salary cap.
it's salary cap. Tax cap is municipal government. Sorry, my other job. Okay, salary cap. And it's set at $20.5 million per school.
For the
Now,
upcoming season. And
yep.
they have mentioned that that could increase, and they have it set, it's approximately 22% of the revenue.
Now, here's what I don't understand yet. Let's take our favorite, Cooper Flagg, who it's pretty clear now that Cooper made north of $20 million from NIL. But the settlement says that the schools are now going to pay directly. Is it in addition that Gatorade can say to Cooper Flagg, this is above the tax cap? And does the committee that is led by Brian Seeley, that has only 45 days to analyze an offer from someone? 45 days is a lifetime in the college basketball world. But do they get to say this? Who is going to do this? And why I say we're back to the wild, wild west is here we go again. You've got a $20.5 million salary cap per school. What's going to stop the boosters from going right back to where we were to say, well, we got to get Cooper Flagg another 5 or 10 million? And we go right back under the table. So going forward, I don't know what we've really solved yet.
Fair. I want to work backwards on a few of the points you brought up there. So, number one, when you're talking about, remind me, the guy that they brought in from baseball, what's his name?
Brian Seeley.
So Mr. Seeley, right? He's in charge of determining whether these deals are market value. And that,
I believe that, yes, that, and I believe he is now in charge overall. Charlie Baker, the head of the NCAA, has put Brian Seeley in charge of how are we going to do this, because Brian Seeley's had a lot of experience with the salary cap.
Right. And that's my big question right now is, from what I read, everything over $600 has to be evaluated to determine whether it is appropriate for the athlete's market value. And my question is, how do you determine their market value? Because in, November, somebody could be worth, let's stick with basketball, because football I can't speak to as well. But in basketball, somebody in November could be worth I don't know, let's just say $100,000. But by the time they get to March Madness, they could be worth $1 million. So how do you determine? Are you still going to say that when they're in March Madness, they're only worth, the 100,000 that they were worth in November, or is that valuation going to change as their production changes? Or could someone come in at $1 million, and by the time you get to March Madness, they're not playing very well, and now they're worth 100,000, and you find out that the school overpaid? Like, how do they police this? To your point, it brings up a lot of questions.
It absolutely does. And one of the big questions for me, and I don't know how this happens. So right now, it wasn't done through the schools. It was negotiated through the players and whoever was paying them. And to me, that just took care of all the under the table stuff. They now get to just say, here, we're getting Cooper Flag for 20 million. Theoretically, the way that I read it is the 20.5 million is dispersed by the school directly to the athlete. And therefore, if Gatorade wants to give 10 million to Cooper Flag, do they have to go through the school? And the school, that is part of the salary cap, which technically that would make sense to me, that they can no longer negotiate individually. And yes, each school can only accept 20.5 soon. And by 2035, 33 million. They
Yep.
started to
It's going to go up.
graduate the salary cap, which sounds like an intelligent way to think about it. But boy, is there a lot to be worked out. And we're now, we think we're a long way from the NBA, from the college basketball season, but as far as this is concerned, and I don't have it in my notes, but it may also be that one place I read. Do you know, does it take effect this season?
This season, yes. So
I don't know how this gets into place.
there's so much to unpack. I want to go backwards a little bit more, because there's one other thing I want to bring up, which is, I don't know if you've seen this. I think it just came out today, but there are Title IX lawsuits from women's players talking about this back pay, and that I'm not sure. I want to say this off the bat. I am not sure about the legality of how that works. But from what I understand from reading the articles, in terms of this back pay that we're talking about, which is for athletes from 2016 to present day, where they will be paid out approximately $2.8 billion. And let's see, 90% of that money is going to go to, as you said, the Power 5 schools. Football is a good chunk of it, and basketball, men's basketball to be specific. So 90% is going to football.
Although,
hold on.
Go ahead.
And then women's basketball is going to make 5% of that. And then
they get a piece.
The remaining other athletes will receive 5%. And to me, I'm not sure. Again, I will say this again. I'm not sure about the legality of Title IX. But in terms of fairness and market value, that seems about right. In terms of college football, I wish they split college football, college basketball, because I do think there is a difference between those two. And then I think it's college football, men's college basketball, women's college basketball, and then everyone else. I've come to learn baseball is a lot bigger college sport in the South than I really had any idea. But it's still, I still think, of that remaining 5%, maybe it's 1% or 2%. But these other schools, when we're talking about track and field athletes and, some of these Olympic sports, it's hard to, in terms of market, which is what this is about, it's hard to understand what their market value would be compared to a football team, for instance, where clearly they generate millions of dollars for their school, and it's hard to make that argument for, I don't know, the rowing team, for example.
Well, or good, glad you brought that one up because I forget which of the majors allows quote unquote amateurs for golf. I don't know if it's the Masters or one of them. Those guys become big name within the world of golf if they have a strong showing. If it was the Masters, I may have the tournament wrong, but everyone. So then, why don't they get a nice shot from Titleist or one of the other big companies to earn big time NIL money?
I it's a question, and the only other thing, or two more things on this topic. I'm sure you've got a bit more as well. So for this year, they have increased the maximum roster limit. So we've gone from 13 scholarship players to 15, and I don't know if you've seen this, JD, but a lot of players who've exhausted their eligibility entered into the transfer portal because there was not directly related to this, but there was another. I don't know if it was a lawsuit or something along those lines where they were challenging the NCAA in terms of eligibility to allow all players to have 5 years of eligibility, not just people who have redshirted. Now, we can quibble about whether that should be going on, but now that the rosters have expanded to 15, it does crack open that possibility that some of these guys, if they are deemed eligible, will now be able to play on teams, whereas otherwise these rosters would have been filled already, and there would have been no opportunity for them to join a team later on, if that is going to happen, which I don't know yet.
So, Jack, and given the entirety of speculation, we probably
Yes.
shouldn't spend much more time on this. But the 20.5 million per school is for all the sports at the school.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was reading about Gonzaga and how this is going to affect them. And what they were saying was that I think you got to look at it the other way around, which is that 20.5 million is derived from the revenue because it's 22% of the revenue that your school produces. And so a team like Gonzaga, they don't have football revenue. So they will not be eligible for that 20.5 million. They will be at a much lower number. And so the question for them is, how do they make up that difference? And that, similar to what you were just saying, there's just too many possibilities, and I'm not sure how that works out. But one last thing on that, it was UCLA and one other school have accepted. It was like a $500 million deal with a private equity firm, and they are not going to be part of this NCAA settlement, and so they will have a different way of funding their teams. This is going to be something where we're recording this June 11th. This is going to be something where in August we're going to revisit and hopefully have more clarity, but we still will not have a great answers as to how this is all going to work because it's still coming out and teams are still figuring it out. And the last point I want to make, JD, is that I don't know if you noticed, this has already started, but I think it's going to accelerate. Schools have started charging fans what they call talent fees, and to continue to grow their facilities, etc. So the costs are not going to be taken out from the exorbitant salaries that a lot of these presidents and athletic directors get. No. They're not going to foot the bill. They're going to make sure that the fans are the ones who are going to pay more for their tickets and concessions and parking, etc. So it was just another way where they've decided to pass the buck and make sure that yes, players will be paid now, but we're not going to take a cut. Don't think that it's coming out of our pockets.
Look, um, it's a long time coming that from the player's point of view, the schools made billions, obviously based on the settlement, over television rights, over sponsorships, over alumni donations to the school because they want to, just go there and continue their days when they were there as, watching as a student. 50 years later, they still want to be there because of that. They're willing to
Yep.
contribute 100,000 or whatever to the football program or the basketball program. Boy, this is like I said, going backward, long time coming in two ways. There were players that deserved to be compensated. They will hopefully get justifiably compensated. And the other issue is clearly that going forward, as far as their ability to share somehow, because as we know, after giving 2 or 3 years to a school, they get injured. That's it. And as far as I know, the NFL doesn't have a program to take care of college players who got injured and never made it to the NFL. And so they cash in while they can. But boy, Brian Seeley, love to get him on the show and figure out how many staff people he's going to have. And then the enforcement division. We're going to go back to what's my favorite book by Michael Lewis, The Blind Side.
Oh.
Well, both of them, but The Blind Side. We're going to go back to the scene where the woman from the NCAA is interviewing him and asking, why did you go to Ole Miss as opposed to Tennessee? And boy, okay. What's up? What else is on your mind, Jack?
Well, we've got coaches' challenges, and what a interesting thing to come to college basketball. For those of you who don't know, similar to the NBA, college basketball, another change heading into next season, they will be able to make coaches challenges. So what does that mean? Coaches can now challenge at any point in the game out of bounds calls, basket interference or goaltending, and whether a secondary defender was in the restricted area of the arc. And similar to the NBA, you have to have a timeout to request a review. If you lose your first challenge, you lose your timeout. If you win, you will retain your challenge, and then you will have one more for the remainder of the game. So there are some other details in it, but that's the gist. So what that means is that I hope what that means, I should say, is that there are maybe a few less reviews.
Yes, I knew you were going there because the final 2 minutes, and again, I have to say, in the effort to get the call right by the official, the reviews would drive us crazy. I mean, what the heck did you need timeouts for? I mean, there were timeouts every 3 seconds as I want to review that. I want to review that. But it was done to say we want to get the right outcome. Well,
we're continuing in that direction, and I think this is a good change. I think it's a good change as of today, June 11th, 2025. Maybe in November, 15th, 2025, there's going to be a review I don't like, and I'm going to feel like this was not a good change. But as of right now, I think it makes sense. I think it's going to be. Uh, I think the one thing that I think is going to be fascinating about this is in the NBA, there are dedicated members of the staff whose job it is to have an iPad and be able to make a quick decision. You, well, every player's signals review it after every call that is on them. You can't as they. So I forgot who it was. Stan Van Gundy, I think, on the TNT broadcast was like saying something about every player. You should never listen to the player. And I think Richard Jefferson said something along the lines of, it should be an automatic review if somebody does this, and that would make sure that everyone stops doing it, because then
Jack,
you'd be
do
out.
you do you? I mean, is it just me, or is there any sport that after every play, some player is yelling at the official?
Uh, uh, Football or soccer, whatever term you want to use, there's a good amount of that. Not the
Not
difference
nearly
is
as much in football because you got 7 referees and the game. I think the game is handled
well,
much better.
I
The
was
flow of the game, but I will say to you that soccer with the flop, at which there's a what is there now a yellow card for a flop or
there is. I was referring to soccer and football in the same breath.
okay.
I wasn't talking about American football, but what I will say is that with soccer, just to be clear for all of us in America, um, there are less stoppages, so there are less opportunities for guys to complain to the official or the ref,
Right,
whatever instance it is.
they go at the end of the play, when a whistle's been blown, but there aren't as many whistles
Right,
as in a
but
basketball game. And here's the thing about, you've played basketball. I played basketball for years. On almost any given play, that's not fair. There's a high percentage of the plays where you could look at it, depending on the camera angle, it looks one way or it looks the other way. And you can understand why both players are yelling. There is then a percentage of calls where it's like, you got to be kidding. That was a foul. Please, why are we challenging this? This is nuts. Other than the game may be on the line, who knows? They have a challenge left, so they'll use it.
yeah,
I don't know. I'd rather go back to the rule that I wish they would just do away with, what is it? Offensive goaltending is the one that I always complain to you about. You say in Europe there is no offensive goaltending in basketball,
well, there's no
right?
goaltending.
No
Well, okay, no, no,
goaltending.
no. There, you cannot. Okay. How do I explain this? Because I'm not used to those rules. Once the ball touches the rim, you can knock it off, but it can't be like on the way down on the initial shot. You can't.
Okay, all right.
That's the best way. Now, the point I was getting to though. So, all right, let's because we went off the rails a little bit there. That's the show. I think people are used to that now. So, the point I was getting to though was, in the NBA, you've got the guy, the dedicated iPad guy, who's looking at it. He's got to respond, quickly, right? The head coach turns around. He's like, what is, right? So, in the NBA, your staffs are pretty uniform. You've got probably roughly the same amount of coaches, per team. In college, there's big discrepancies between a Duke and a, South Carolina State in terms of the resources they have available, the number of coaches on their staff, etc. And so the question I have is, like, how big of an advantage could this be for now in conference play? Do I think it matters? No. But in March Madness, you could have a coaching staff with 12 members on it, and, you're playing some, mid-major who's got 6 coaches. And it becomes a lot more difficult for them to match up with managing, the replays, etc. of the game. So It's just something that I'm curious about in terms of the balance of power with college basketball, especially with what we talked about the first 20 minutes of the show and how that's going to affect the Power 5 schools moving forward. It just seems like and the transfer portal is just getting harder and harder for the mid-majors to keep up with everybody else.
So I think my closing comment will be it all goes back for me to the evening I was at the K Academy and I listened to Coach K say, it's just not my game anymore. It's time to give it to somebody else. Here are two more reasons that had he given that speech today, he would have added, and now I got to monitor a salary cap. And now there's a coach's challenge in addition to the, maybe the NIL gets merged into the salary cap. It's still not clear to me, but we're recruiting high school students. We're recruiting and the portal lost 1 year, but it's still a portal. And
could you imagine Coach K ripping off his jacket, yelling at Roger Ayers, "You gotta! I have to challenge this? Are you kidding me?" And there'd be several, F-bombs mixed in there. Like it would be great television. But to your point, yeah, Coach K, he picked the right time to exit the sport. So with that, per usual, something we should have said about 20 minutes ago. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, share it with your friends. We're almost at 1,700.
Hey, yeah. What do we need? 6?
We need 6 more, although you never know.
We want 6 of you who are listening to this to find 6 friends to subscribe, and then we've made it to
1,700.
1,700. 6. That's all. Tap on your wife. Tap on your, husband, because we know we have all kinds of listeners. Come on, 6 more, and we can do it. And then we begin the drive to
1,800.
1,800. All
We're
right.
also on TikTok, a little bit on Instagram, and Twitter, I guess X. Until next time, peace.